A few days ago, during the Unreal Fest event, Epic Games released to the public a first iteration of the Blender tools. These tools for now include the Send to Unreal and the UE to Rigify add-ons. Today we're gonna take a look at the Send to Unreal one and how I made this asset and brought it into Unreal with just one click. So let's go! This is Nazzareno here, co-founder and tech artist at By Design. If you like the content, please give a like, share and subscribe. If you're already subscribed, just click the bell icon so you're notified of any new fresh tutorial that comes out. With this out of the way, let's see how to download, install and play around with the new Send to Unreal add-on released by Epic Games. The first thing you need to do in order to be able to download these tools is to be part of the Epic Games organization on GitHub. So request to be part of it, and once you are accepted, you will be able to find these Blender tools section here under the different repositories published by Epic Games. If we click on Blender tools, we will see we have the Send to Unreal download and the UE to Rigify download. Let's click to Send to Unreal and let's choose the latest version and download. Once we've done that, we can jump into Blender, go to Preferences, Add-ons, install our folder where we can find the zip file we just downloaded and click Install Add-on. I've already done that, so we can look for Send, and in my case it's already enabled, but we'll find the same pipeline, Send to Unreal add-on here. Just enable it, and the only thing I will touch for now is to enable this Always Use Unreal Scene Scale. Every time you boot Blender, this will check that you have the correct units here, and the unit scale is at 0.01. This will allow us to have the perfect matching between our Blender scene and the Unreal Engine one. This option also will set the scale of the grid accordingly. Other options available here in the add-on settings are the path. We can customize for the imported static meshes, for the imported animations, and for the skeleton asset. We can change some export settings and also choose the different FBX settings and change them to our likings. I will leave everything by default for now. In the import section, we can choose what will be imported into Unreal, so materials, textures, animations, LODs, and we can also choose to, during the import process, the FBX import UI into Unreal. Of course, it's pretty neat to have it disabled because it will allow us to import directly into Unreal super fast with just a click of a button here in Blender. Validations are a couple of checks that the add-on can do on our meshes. So it can check if we have unused materials, and it can check if we have correct path for our textures. Once we have done that, we need to set a couple of things into Unreal in order to this add-on to work correctly. First of all, we will need to jump into plugins, built-in plugins, and look for Python and enable the Python editor script plugin. The editor will ask you to restart your project. Once you have done that, we can jump into project settings and look for Python also here and enable the remote execution. And then lastly, we need to go to editor preferences, search for CPU and disable this use less CPU when in background. Once we have done that, we can jump back to Blender and start using the add-on. So I already have a simple mesh here with no materials, nothing special. Let's test the add-on. So we have a new entry here in the header, pipeline export send to Unreal. As you can see, we get a message. So if you noticed here, once we enable the add-on, we have 3 new collections available in our scene. Do not change the name of these collections because they are directly tied to the Send to Unreal add-on. In order to send stuff from Blender to Unreal, we need to move our different objects in the correct collection. So in this case, I have a simple mesh. I want to send it over, so I just need to move it to the mesh collection. And now everything is inside here will be sent to Unreal with just one click. So let's go back to the pipeline export send to Unreal. And we got this new folder called exactly what we chose in the add-on settings. So by default it's called untitled category, and then we have untitled asset, and here we have our steps asset we can bring into the scene. It has only one material slot and no materials imported. So if we go back to Blender, I want to modify this mesh, make it a bit more interesting, and for doing this quickly and to get a really nice effect, I want to use another add-on. It's called ByGen and it's made by Curtis Holt. It's a really nice add-on. I will link it into the description and maybe go through it a little bit more deeply in another video, but for now just use it quickly to modify our mesh. So go to By Tools on ByGen, and what I like to do in order to get the effect I want is to change these settings into Art Surface Skin, disable the mirror and just apply it to this mesh. Once we apply it, we will have a lot of modifiers here on the mesh. First of all, let's delete the skin modifier, we don't need it, and immediately we get a really interesting result. Due to the scale we need to use for the Send to Unreal add-on and how this ByGen add-on is working, we can tweak a couple of things in order to avoid these super thin bevels. So we can jump into the solidify modifier and change it a little bit. Let's go more negative and bring up these meshes. As you can see, the effect is awesome. We kept a little bit the original shape, but we got this really interesting effect here in the mesh. We can duplicate it and send one copy to a new hide collection, for example, and hide it so we have a backup. And we can apply every modifier here, and in order to do that quickly we can go to Object, Convert to Mesh, and everything is applied at once. We can go to UV editing and quickly apply a smart UV project just to have some kind of UVs in place. We can then apply a material. So let's create a new material. Let's call it Rocks 01. Change the color and we can preview it. We can go back to the modeling tab and in order to have the correct shape imported into Unreal, do not forget in this case is to Ctrl F and triangulate faces so we keep exactly the same shape also into Unreal. And then we can try to update the first steps mesh we already imported into Unreal. So let's go back to pipeline, export, send to Unreal, and as you can see our mesh is already imported and updated. We have the old material, we can delete it, and this is the new Rocks 01 we applied to the whole mesh. Our UV map it's applied, and we can also jump back here into build settings and let's for example apply these changes, and we will have also a second channel for the light mapping if needed. Let's close it, save everything, and if we apply a material here, and in this case in order to have this effect I need to come here, search for custom and enable the render custom depth pass. But let's change it a little bit more and add a simple animation to it. Let's go back to Blender and then a thing that I really like to do for the Send to Unreal add-on is to go to pipeline, export, send to Unreal, right click and assign to quick favorites. I already did that, so I can just press Q and send to Unreal once I'm ready to do that. But let's change a little bit our mesh before doing that again. Let's add a second material to our mesh. Let's select a rather small face like this one for example. Go to select similar area. We can play a bit with these settings here and the threshold. In this case compared to less looks nice, and let's create a second slot, create a duplicate of the same material and change a bit the color and assign it. We can now send it to Unreal and let's see how fast it is to send it over. Q, send to Unreal, boom, import done. We now have two material slots. We can add another material here and the effect starts to be pretty nice. Let's move on adding something with a simple animation. Let's go back to Blender. Let's add a third material first. Let's make a simple plane, scale it until it fits, and then we can move everything else a bit lower, something like this. and then we can assign a new material here. Let's call it water. Let's give to it a color and apply it. Let's create a new mesh, a cube in this case, and then from the front view, let's bring it a bit up. And do something like this. And then we want to cut here, a cut there, and another cut here, and probably something else here, so we can play around with that and do something like this, and then like this, and then again like this. And then we can, for example, take random vertices, enable the proportional editing fall off, and go to random, and then we can scale it and increase the radius of the effect. Once we are happy with the effect, we can, just to be sure, select if the scaling is correct. Let's apply all transform just to be super sure. Let's go back to Bygen and apply again the art surface skin. Delete the skin modifier and then play around with the solidify modifier, and then apply everything, converting the mesh with this one. And then we can select everything, Smart View project. We can take a look, super quick UV, and we can add, for example, the same rocks material, and then also the rocks too. And also in this case we want to select a face like this one area and apply the second material. Now we want to animate this central piece, so let's add an armature. Let's scale it a bit and let's move it a bit in the center of the piece. That's fine. Let's select the mesh and then the armature, Ctrl P and set to parent. Let's use the with automatic weights, even if in this case we don't need it, but it's fine. Let's animate the armature. Let's go to the timeline. 250 frames are just fine. So let's record the location and the rotation at the first frame. Let's go to the last frame and let's do the same. And then we change this to 360 and record again the keyframe. So right now we have this rotation, but I want it to be linear, so be sure to have the keyframes selected. They have to be yellow. Right click and interpolate mode, set it to linear. So now we have a smooth 360 rotation. And now let's bring everything into Unreal. We have to move the armature inside the rig collection, and then the cube we can rename like totem. We have to move it inside the mesh collection along with the steps. Be sure before sending to Unreal that if you have situations like this one with weird meshes and angons, always Ctrl F in edit mode and triangulate faces. This will help Unreal understand the shape and correctly translate it and import it into the engine. If you're not doing this, you will probably end up with a slightly different mesh inside Unreal, and then like in this case that we have an armature attached to this mesh, probably the animation we prepared will not import correctly. We can simply come here and Q send to Unreal, and everything is directly imported. Our static mesh now has also the plane, and we have the totem animation correctly running in the engine. We can import this piece, put some other materials, enable custom depth pass also for this one in order to have our outline effect and the cell shading effect. We can grab this animated material here for the water. As a last test, we can try to update our skeletal mesh. So back to Blender, we can record the location at the first frame and record the same location at the last frame, and then we can go like something like here and go a bit up and record the location, and then move to something like this and drop down our shape and record the location again. In this case, for the location, I want to be sure that the interpolation is set to Bezier, so we have a nice and smooth transition from up to down, while the rotation is nice to be linear in this case. So let's try reimporting our mesh. In this case, we don't want to reimport our static mesh, so we can move it out of the mesh collection, so it will not be reimported into Unreal. We want our totem static mesh and our totem armature to update, so we keep everything in there. Let's click Q and send to Unreal, and let's see if the animation updated, and it updated super nice. So again, if we take a look here and simulate. Everything looks perfect. So this was a quick look at the Send to Unreal Blender add-on. The first iteration works really well. It's incredible to see the amount of support that Epic Games is bringing to Blender. First with a huge mega grant, and then with internal development of these tools that speed up the process from Blender to Unreal and back. I hope you liked the video. If you did, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, grab these new tools and have fun, and see you to the next one.